Folks, unrest overnight in St. Louis when an off-duty police officer working as a security guard shot and killed 18-year-old Von Derek Myers Jr. He was shot 17 times by this police officer in St. Louis, Missouri. Folks, there was a lot of folks, a number of people who showed up at the scene protesting the shooting. In fact, his relatives say he had just left a sandwich shop and had a sandwich. A 9mm gun was found at the scene. Of course, there will be an autopsy to determine whether or not there was gun residue on his hands. This, of course, follows the Mike Brown shooting. Today, the second month anniversary of the shooting of Mike Brown. It happened just 2 months ago, and so that city is really on edge. Let me turn to our panel right now. Rock Newman, host of the Rock Newman Show on Howard University's television station right here in the nation's capital. Lauren Victoria Burke with Politic365.com, and Armstrong Williams, host of The Right Side. And you know, bottom line is, when you look at this particular shooting, you have, whether it's in St. Louis, whether it's the incident, the brother in Hammond, Indiana, where they busted out his window and then they tased him because he wasn't even a driver. You look at some of these other cases. I mean, you have some serious issues with police and black men in this country. Well,
we've had them for years. The difference is we have the social media that's recording more of these incidents. This has been going on for a long time, but now it's been recorded. Quite frankly, I want to hear from our conservative friends on this with regard to too much government. We've been talking about too much government now since 2010. We elected a Congress of Tea Party members talked about too much government. Now, this would be, to me, a very good example of too much government, yet we hear silence from conservatives.
I think she was talking to you, Armstrong.
Look, you know, obviously, Ferguson continues to reel. It's just out of control. I mean, it seems like every 2 weeks somebody else is being shot by a police officer. And obviously, it's a tragedy because somebody lost their child. But, you know, it's too early to tell what the circumstances are, so I'm not going to indict law enforcement based on little information. But obviously, there needs to be some kinds of understanding between the leadership and even the state, the governor. Somebody needs to get involved in this situation to bring some kind of common sense. I mean, obviously, I don't ever understand why a law enforcement official has to shoot someone 7 or 8 times. I just don't understand that. There's got to be a better way. They have tasers. They have so many other options at their disposal. They're police officers. Why do you have to resort to at least taking somebody's life? I just don't understand.
Rock, in this case, early on, the initial report that witnesses said he had been tased. The police department said he did not have a taser. He actually did fire 17 shots.
You know, no one would ever accuse me of being conservative. So I don't think she was talking. So I don't think she was talking to me. In this particular incident, I think we have to take this one at a time, because we are early in this process.
Because what the police say that the young man fired 3 times at the police officer. Family members say he wasn't carrying a gun. And so once you go through the autopsy, was there gun residue on his hands to show that he actually fired a weapon?
We don't want to run the risk of invalidating some legitimate concern and protest over matters that happen that should be stopped by falsifying information too early in the process here and having a rush to judgment that will illegitimize some of the other protests.
And remember, shortly after Mike Brown was killed, they had another incident where this disturbed young man had taken 2 energy drinks from a store. Cops arrived, and we played the video, and it literally was 16 seconds from the time that door opened to the time 7 shots were fired. And it was clear on the call, because an alderman had called as well. It was clear this young man was disturbed. And so what bothered me was, to Armstrong's point, which I think is an important point, why is it that it's the immediate resort to lethal force?
There is.
I mean, I think that's the struggle.
Also, we've been seeing video after video. Now this Myers situation, apparently nobody was called. He was stopped on a check, a civilian check.
Apparently this guy he was an off-duty police officer. He was working for a security firm. He saw this group of 3 or 4 young men, and he decided to do what is called a pedestrian check.
So nobody called the officer. Just like in the Eric Garner case, where we have a cop that shows up, just like in the Michael Brown case, nobody called that cop. My Michael Brown was jaywalking. The cop shows up and now Michael Brown is dead. I mean, how many videos do we have to see? How many incidents do we have to have? How many dead people do we have to have before we believe something's going on? If this was another country, if we were talking about Ukraine, the UN would be involved in this. But everybody's all silent, particularly on the conservative side. All of a sudden, it's not too much government to see the police force, which is controlled by the state, targeting a minority group. And if it was any other country, we would have a completely different attitude about it.
I think targeting is
Absolutely
a very strong way. I would use profile. I think in the minds, they associate these young black men with violent crimes. And I think that's the problem. And that goes back to training. I think a lot of this goes back to the way they're trained and what they're taught these young black men are. But also you have to think about this. If you live in a community where 90% of the crimes are being committed by young black men, and obviously you can, it's not a stretch to say that's going to become your profile.
Well, I just think even as we are waiting for more things to unfold, I do believe there has to be even more discussion in terms of this notion that police automatically go to lethal force.
This culture of fear that is being created by aggressive actions from the police force. Not just aggressive, but violent and deadly action.
At a time when crime is at a 30-year low.
Yeah, and I mean, that particular culture, there needs to be some wholesale addressing of the problem throughout the country.
Well, maybe what they need to do is adapt the Secret Service philosophy. Like the guy who jumped over the White House fence. You don't kill, you give them the benefit of the doubt. You don't pull your weapon. Maybe the police should have that same mentality. And instead of saying the police, because what happens with law enforcement, it is their judgment and their judgment alone whether to pull that trigger or not.
And that's why in the case of John Crawford in Beaver Creek, Ohio, a brother who was simply on his phone walking around a Walmart, that grand jury chose not to indict those officers because they said it was sort of within the bounds of the procedures. You have the brother in Savannah, Georgia, who was handcuffed, who was shot and killed in the back of a police car. And in fact, we'll be talking on Monday to the lawyer, this 103-year-old black man who was in South Carolina. He had a 22, and he was scared. They got the video of him even in his room, and they bust in, and he begins to fire, and then of course they shoot him. Not one time though did they call a family member to say, "Hey, can y'all come talk to you?"
We have a model. We have a model in Rialto, California, of cops having to wear the camera.
Right.
And the dramatic decrease in citizen complaints and the decrease in police brutality.
Here's my point.
We got to accelerate everybody, every cop wearing those.
But the 103-year-old who was shot, they actually put cameras, slid them under the door. It's on YouTube right now. You see the whole video, but it went to, why'd you bust down the door? Why'd you call a family member? I got to go to a break right now. Hold tight 1 second. We come